They called me broken. That's what it felt like, hearing his mother's voice twist the simple truth of my body into something fundamentally wrong. My condition, the medical term for which escapes me in moments like these, means I carry all the necessary components within me, but they simply don't function in the way required. Specifically, my body cannot build the necessary lining, rendering conception impossible. On the bright side, the messy inconvenience of monthly cycles has never been part of my 32 years. Somehow, his mother discovered this fact. I never shared it directly with her, perhaps a stray comment from a relative I had confided in, or maybe someone in my own family spoke too freely. My inner circle knows, as do a few of his kin I felt close enough to share with. The moment she learned, she cornered me, her expression hardening with accusation. Then, the pronouncement, her son would not marry me, not someone who could never give him children. What she didn't grasp, or chose to ignore, was that he and I had already navigated this terrain. We'd talked, acknowledged the disappointment, yes, but ultimately arrived at acceptance. My inability to bear children was something we were okay with. Her focus, however, remained fixed on her own perceived lack for her son's future. She began circulating her decree among their family, instructing relatives to boycott our impending wedding, determined to prevent her son from binding himself to someone defective, someone incapable of fulfilling her specific desires for his life. A small, foolish part of me held on to the hope she might soften, might eventually accept our reality. But as things stood, the thought of her presence at the wedding felt like a threat, a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate our joy with a hurtful comment or a dramatic scene. He, caught in the middle, spoke of loving his mother but was agonizing over whether to even extend an invitation. We'd even considered eloping, a quiet civil ceremony with just a handful of witnesses, delivering the news to her as a fait accompli later. Yet, she wouldn't even accept simple dinner invitations to our home. The exhaustion of her constant public denigration, branding me defective to anyone who would listen, was starting to wear me down. His father, bless him, remained entirely supportive. Most of his aunts and uncles showed understanding. We'd spoken openly about the possibility of adoption down the line, another avenue she summarily dismissed because the child wouldn't share their blood, wouldn't be her real grandchild. It was just a lot to carry. Just needing to vent this ache in my chest. Thank you for listening. Update 1. A day of anticipation, bookended by 2 messages. The first, a bomb. His father, expressing his dismay at his wife's behavior, his affection for me as the daughter he never had, and his genuine belief that his son was profoundly lucky to have found me. A genuine, heartfelt connection reaching out before the storm. The second, sharper, from his aunt, mirroring his father's sentiment but adding a sting. His mother had sought her out, explicitly asked her not to attend the wedding, and then added a bitter aside about her own body, hinting at a sense of uselessness now that a certain future generation wouldn't exist. The air felt thick with dread, anticipating the evening's confrontation. He had insisted I stay away, convinced my presence would only inflame the situation. So, I did as he asked. After work, I retreated to the quiet of our place, the promise of delivery pizza the only comfort on the immediate horizon. My plan was simple: curl up on the sofa, lose myself in the screen, and find solace in the rhythmic purr and soft fur of my cat. That connection, the quiet interaction with her, offered a genuine grounding I desperately needed. Update 2. For those who haven't read my previous post, the core issue is my inability to carry a child. My almost mother-in-law had taken this fact and wielded it like a weapon, relentlessly attempting to sabotage our future wedding by turning guests against us and persistently labeling me defective. My fiancé, the man who would soon not be my husband, and his father were scheduled to confront her, to reason with her, on Tuesday night. She won. I'm still unsure of the exact dynamics, what words were exchanged, or how the turning point occurred, but he came home and the dam broke. All the understanding, all our prior conversations about acceptance and alternatives like adoption, seemed to evaporate. He looked at me, and suddenly the future we'd planned was conditional. He wanted children, he stated, and if I couldn't provide them biologically, the wedding was off. The words tasted like hers, not his. That sounds like your mother speaking, I challenged, the shock giving way to a rising tide of pain and anger. His retort was defensive, curt. I can speak for myself. The exchange escalated rapidly, voices lifting, words sharp and unforgiving. In that storm of sound and accusation, I simply moved. Grabbed a bag, threw in essentials, the movements almost automatic. I drove to my parents' house, seeking refuge, the silence there a stark contrast to the shouting I'd fled. The next day, I called work and feigned illness. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, the weight of 23 years pressing down. We'd met as children, 9 years old, evolving from playground friends to something deeper, something that carried us through high school, college, and into shared adulthood under one roof. He was my first love, my only love, and I, as far as I knew, was his. We hadn't rushed marriage. Our bond felt complete without a formal declaration. That changed only when my father received a devastating diagnosis. His deepest wish, his quiet hope, was to walk his only daughter down the aisle. To fulfill that wish while he still could become our new timeline. Now, that future was gone. Soon, I would submit my 2 months' notice at work, allowing time for a replacement to be found and trained. Then, I would leave. Go back to Germany. My father's German roots, my mother's American ones. A life started there before we moved here when I was a child. Friends, family, a history waited for me. My friend Vanessa, the one who'd once offered to be a surrogate if we went that route, had already extended another offer. Her spare room, a place to land and regroup until I could find my own footing. No, there's no storybook ending here. She got what she wanted. The architect of this pain, his mother, succeeded not just in dismantling our relationship, but in effectively driving me out of this life, this country. I considered staying, maybe finding a new place across town or elsewhere in the state, but the thought was unbearable. This place is saturated with memories, painful echoes of a future now lost. My anchors, my true support system, my family and friends, are across the ocean. That's where I have to go. I've weathered my share of pointless criticisms over the years, from my height to the lingering traces of an accent when I first arrived here, smoothed out now, leaving me sounding just like anyone else from the Midwest, to other trivial things people fixate on. But this cuts differently. I used to shield myself with defiance, telling myself, this is just who I am. Their discomfort is their burden, not mine. And maybe someday, years from now, I'll be able to apply that logic to this wound too. But it's too raw right now. Just pouring this out, tears streaming, the thoughts tumbling out disjointed. Grateful for anyone reading this, for any kindness offered. My apologies if it's hard to follow. My mind is just fractured. Update 3. Thank you truly for the outpouring of support and understanding. A couple of surreal things happened today. One was deeply uncomfortable, the other simply bizarre. First, during my lunch break, a quick dash to the grocery store for some things Mom needed for dinner. And there she was. The woman who almost became my mother-in-law, the source of so much heartbreak. I'll call her Barbie. It feels fitting, a brittle, manufactured kind of perfection. We were in the same aisle, our eyes met for a fraction of a second across the distance. And then, like a startled deer, she whipped around and vanished, practically running from the store. Nothing to say, apparently. The second oddity involved my father. He came over to the house to help me gather my belongings. He's already agreed to handle the sale of the place, ensuring I get my fair share of the proceeds. While we were there, he stood sentinel in the corner, his gaze fixed on my ex, a silent, simmering fury radiating from him. Then, in a moment of staggering misjudgment, my ex decided, with my father standing right there, that this was the time for one last desperate attempt at connection, at claiming something he felt was still his. Something inside me just snapped. My hand went instinctively to the front of my sweater, the area just beneath it a landscape he had known intimately. "You," I told him, my voice shaking but firm, "will never lay eyes on this again, much less touch it or anything else related to me. Ever." His face flushed crimson. He turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind him. My father, who had been a statue of protective rage, suddenly doubled over, roaring with laughter. He gasped out, "I can't believe you just did that." Still vibrating with adrenaline and the sheer audacity of my own action, I just shook my head. "Neither can I." Later, at home, sitting down to dinner with my parents, my mom, in a moment of innocent conversation, asked about Vanessa, my friend in Germany. "What does Vanessa's husband do again?" she inquired casually. And that was it. The dam broke. The question, so simple, so removed from the storm I was living, sent me spiraling into heaving, gut-wrenching sobs. After a while, my dad simply came over, scooped me up, and carried me upstairs to bed, just like he used to when I was small. I'm typing this from there now. I made sure he knew to tell Mom it wasn't her fault, that the question was just the unfortunate trigger for a release that had to happen. A kind colleague at work is taking my cat, and Dad will store the rest: the tennis trophies, the yearbooks, the photos. He insists I might want the pictures back someday, maybe in 5 years, and he'll keep them safe until I'm ready. Again, endless thanks for the messages of support. I'll post updates if anything significant happens and answer questions when I can. Update 4. The notice is given. Today, I told them at work I was leaving. The atmosphere had been buzzing with speculation the last couple of days anyway, the office grapevine working overtime. So, I went to my boss and explained the situation. I'm leaving, but I'll stay on to train my replacement. My final day, a twist of fate, falls on Valentine's Day. Fitting, I suppose, given the circumstances. What else would I be doing? The 2 weeks after that will be a blur of farewells, revisiting favorite spots in town, a bittersweet goodbye to this chapter. Then, on February 29th, my parents will drive me to Chicago, about 4 hours away. The next day, March 1st, I fly to Munich. Vanessa is there. I'll stay with her and her family for a few days while I try to get my bearings, figure out the next steps. My childhood hometown in Germany is about 2.5 hours from Munich. It's a small place, maybe 40,000 people, with a castle and a fascinating museum dedicated to tin soldiers. I have family there still. The decision looms: base myself in Munich with its wider opportunities, return to the familiar comfort of my hometown, or strike out somewhere completely new in Germany, like Hamburg or Berlin. Along with sorting out the practicalities, I went to the realtor handling the house sale to sign the paperwork giving my father authority. The agent, matter-of-factly, commented, "No problem, I have a lot of experience with divorcing couples." The irony hit like a physical blow. I wasn't even married. Coming home, dinner was quiet. Afterward, Mom and I settled in, and she began braiding my hair. It's our ritual, our special time. It's something we've done for all the significant moments, not just the silly ones, but the big ones too: the diagnosis of my condition, before state tennis matches, leaving for college. This felt like one of the biggest. Later, his best friend called. He'd heard what happened, expressed his dismay, using stronger language than I can write here, and invited me to spend an evening with his family before I left. I was always closer to his wife, but the offer felt genuine, a lifeline in the storm. I'll go. It's hard to process how quickly life can turn. Last week, I was contemplating wedding details. This week, I'm planning an international move, a complete restart. Mom suggested visiting the zoo in Chicago on my last day here. We went there when we first moved to America. She thinks it would be a perfect symmetry, a bookend to my 23 years in this country. It feels like yesterday, moving into that new house, and a kind boy with his mother showing up with cookies, welcoming us to the neighborhood while I tried to keep my dog away from the movers. People, and time, certainly change. Deciding where in Germany to land feels like a whole new challenge, adding another layer to the chaos. My hometown, about a 2.5-hour drive away, offers the comfort of familiar streets and remaining family. It's a quiet place, maybe 40,000 residents, boasts a castle and a rather unique museum dedicated to tin soldiers, small-town charm. But then there's Munich, with its pulse and potential opportunities. Or perhaps somewhere else entirely, like Hamburg or Berlin. It's a choice I need to make soon. Handling the practicalities of leaving meant a trip to the realtor managing the house sale. Signing over power of attorney to my father felt like another piece of my life being handed over. The agent, processing the documents, commented with a practiced ease, "No problem at all, I deal with a lot of divorcing couples." The words landed with an unintended sting. I wasn't even married. Dinner that night was quiet, reflective. Afterward, Mom and I settled onto the sofa, and she began braiding my hair. It's our silent language, a ritual stretching back decades. We've marked all the significant transitions this way, from childhood talks to momentous life events, the diagnosis of my condition, the intensity before state tennis tournaments, the bittersweet departure for college. This felt like one of the most significant yet. Later, a call came from his best friend. He'd heard what happened and didn't mince words about his disapproval, expressing it far more strongly than I can recount here. He extended an invitation to spend an evening with his family before I left. I was always closer to his wife than him, but the gesture meant something. I'll go. The speed of it all is dizzying. Just last week, the focus was on wedding plans. Now, I'm charting a course out of the country, dismantling a life built over 2 decades, and preparing to start from scratch 5,000 miles away. Mom suggested a trip to the Chicago Zoo on my final day in the States. We went there shortly after we first moved here from Germany. She sees it as a symbolic closing of the loop on my 23 years here. It's strange how vividly I can recall that day, moving into our new house, the knock on the door, a kind boy and his mother arriving with a basket of cookies, a simple welcome to the neighborhood as I wrestled our dog away from the movers outside. How much changes? Update 5. A warning. The events that unfolded tonight were raw and unsettling, leaving me physically trembling. The central act wasn't directed at me in the most conventional sense of violation, though perhaps it could be defined that way. He showed up at my parents' house, asking to speak. I knew, deep down, the kind of outcome he was hoping for, and it was an outcome I was absolutely not going to allow. We spoke briefly, the words stilted. He mumbled apologies. I stated the plain fact that I was leaving, moving back to Germany soon. The reality of it seemed to hit us both simultaneously. Tears welled in his eyes, and mine mirrored them. In a moment of shared vulnerability, a moment I now regret allowing, we hugged. As we held onto each other, I didn't immediately register the subtle shift, the downward movement of his hand against my back, until the distinct, unwelcome pressure against me registered. A possessive grasp, a squeeze that was both shocking and utterly violating. The instant my brain processed the invasion, I recoiled, stepping back. Every inch of my 6'1" frame, every ounce of strength honed by 25 years on the tennis court, channeled into that moment. I struck him across the face. My palm still stings from the force of it. He stumbled back, his face a mask of disbelief. I simply pointed towards the door, my voice a raw command. Get out. A sharper, more cutting word might have slipped out too. Shaken, head bowed, he turned and walked out. The moment I heard his car door slam, the engine turn over, and the sound of his tires on the street fading away, the fragile control I held shattered. I crumpled, tears coming in heaving waves. My father, who had been waiting just outside the room, a silent, watchful presence, he later explained he was listening for any sign I needed him, came in. Seeing me, still shaking and sobbing, he simply held me in a large, comforting embrace. A few minutes into the hug, a ridiculous, dark thought flickered through my mind. What if he, my father, were to suddenly mimic that unwanted gesture? The absurdity of it, the stark contrast between my father's love and the violation I just experienced, sent me into a sudden, jarring fit of hysterical laughter. So there we stood, holding each other, my body racked by alternating waves of sobs and uncontrollable laughter. My mother, hearing the commotion, came downstairs and quietly brought us both something to drink. Moments later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name I now thought of as Barbie, his mother, the one who had set this whole painful chain of events in motion. I didn't hear her side of the conversation directly. Everything I know is what my father relayed to me later. The gist was clear. She was threatening to call the police, accusing me of assault. My father's response was calm, firm. He stated unequivocally that it was justified self-defense, that her son had initiated physical contact, invading my personal space without consent. He added, in a strategic bluff, that we had camera footage of the entire incident, should law enforcement wish to investigate. We don't have cameras, but she didn't need to know that. The line went dead. I haven't seen a single police officer since. I don't know if her threat was empty, or if my father's counterclaim and the mention of non-existent cameras deterred her. I won't pretend I didn't miss the physical closeness we shared. He was my first in so many ways. First date, first kiss, the first person I was ever truly intimate with. That history is undeniable. But the depth of the pain he and his mother inflicted, it overshadows all of it. The thought of him touching me again is repellent. I would rather forego physical connection entirely than allow him that access ever again. Letting him hug me earlier was a moment of absolute weakness, a lapse I immediately regretted, and one I know I must never repeat. Thank you, again, for the space to share this, for the support. I honestly thought the last update would be my last for a while, that I'd go quiet until I was settled in Germany, away from this swirling mess. But here we are. It's late. Time to try and find some rest. Update 6. 2 questions have gnawed at me throughout this ordeal, 2 missing pieces in the puzzle of how my life imploded. First, what truly triggered his sudden change of heart? And second, how did she, Barbie, his mother, even find out about my inability to have children? It wasn't common knowledge, and I certainly never confided in her. Yesterday, one of those mysteries was finally solved, confirming a suspicion I'd held. I was downtown on my lunch break, spending time training the woman taking over my role. She seems perfectly capable, a genuinely nice person I would have enjoyed working alongside under different circumstances. During that lunch hour, I unexpectedly crossed paths with Steve, a friend of his, a neighbor he'd known since childhood, long before I was even in the picture. He'd heard about our breakup. Expressing genuine regret, he asked if it had anything to do with my infertility. Since I hadn't shared this private detail with Steve, he wasn't within that close circle of confidants. His question piqued my curiosity. I asked him what he knew. And then, he told me the whole story, recounting it from his perspective, likely colored by second-hand information, so perhaps not every detail is perfectly accurate. He and my ex, Jack, had been working on Steve's car, a classic, from the 60s, I think. Honestly, cars aren't my thing. Give me 4 wheels, an engine, and a good sound system, and I'm content. If you asked me for specifics, I'd probably just say, it's old and blue. Anyway, they were working on it before heading over to Jack's parents' house. This followed a period where Jack and I had been having low-key conversations about marriage, the kind of casual mentions you toss out over mundane activities like making breakfast. Jack wanted to transition to something more formal, using an old heirloom ring that had been in his family for generations. He asked his mother where the ring was, explaining he wanted it to propose to me. His mother, overjoyed, rushed upstairs tearfully to retrieve it. Returning, still emotional, she expressed how lovely it would be to hear the sound of little feet padding around their house, adding a question about whether I was pregnant. It seemed our long-standing, unspoken commitment, finally moving towards marriage, had led her to a rather specific and incorrect assumption. Jack, in response, pointed out the sounds of small feet we did have, those belonging to Babette, my cat. His mother, dismissive, said, "No, a baby, silly." And that's when he said it. Casual, blunt. Mia can't have babies. According to Steve, he then proceeded to give her a detailed account of my medical reality. Her reaction was immediate and severe. "This isn't going to happen," she declared, returning the ring, slamming the door on both the conversation and our future. The very next day marked the beginning of her campaign, forbidding the marriage, labeling me defective, launching the entire painful saga. Hearing Steve's account, I confirmed that yes, my inability to conceive was indeed a factor in the breakup. He shook his head, calling it a real shame, saying we'd made a great couple, and suggesting Jack must be devastated. I thanked him, continued my lunch, and later that day, the weight of the confirmation sent me back to my room, where I cried into my pillow until my father came to get me for dinner. The revelation that Jack had been the one to share such a deeply personal detail with his mother, essentially arming her against me, felt like a final, sharp betrayal. While the specifics of my condition aren't a state secret, they aren't something I've ever shared lightly. Telling this story here, openly, to strangers, has ironically been a source of comfort. Thank you all, again, for your unwavering support. Update 7. A 2-part update to bring things current. The first part, the good part, I made it. I left the United States on March 1st, flying into Munich. My seatmate on the transatlantic flight was an elderly woman terrified of flying, on her way to visit her son and his family. I never learned what he did or why he was living in Germany, but for roughly 10 hours, she clung to my arm with a grip that could crush bone. Any minor turbulence, any slight shudder of the plane, and it was, thankfully, a relatively smooth flight with only minor bumps, and her grip tightened further. I later discovered a faint bruise on my arm, but mercifully, her fingernails didn't break the skin. We landed safely, and after navigating customs, she was tearfully reunited with her son and his family. This all happened just as the world began locking down, before quarantine measures became strictly enforced, so the process was relatively straightforward. Then, the reality of the situation settled in. The quarantine began in earnest, and I've spent most of my time at my friend Vanessa's house, helping out where I can, primarily tutoring her children in English. My plans to hit the ground running professionally were immediately derailed. 3 job interviews I had scheduled were cancelled due to the unfolding situation. My uncle, who lives up in Kuzelbach, about a 3-hour drive away, has offered to come get me and take me in, but I haven't decided yet if that's the right move. The elderly woman found her son and his family after we cleared customs. It was a tearful reunion, a small moment of warmth in the vast, impersonal airport space. This all happened just before the world shifted into lockdown, before the real intensity of quarantine and isolation began, so navigating through the airport was manageable. Since then, life has been centered within my friend Vanessa's home, adapting to the new reality. I've spent my days helping out, tutoring her children in English, doing my best to contribute. My immediate plans for establishing myself professionally were put on hold. The 3 job interviews I'd secured before arriving were all cancelled as businesses paused hiring. My uncle, living 3 hours north in Kuzelbach, has generously offered to come get me and take me in, but I haven't made up my mind about moving there yet. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, it seems things haven't been easy for him. Apparently, he's been struggling. A friend shared that he even drove to the Cedar Rapids airport, mistakenly thinking that was where I would be flying out of, unaware that my parents had driven me to Chicago for a direct flight. Finding I wasn't there, he went home, assuming a mix-up in timing. Then came the letters. Several arrived at my parents' house. My mother, trying to help, opened one and began reading it to me over the phone, but I had to stop her quickly. Despite the openness Mom and I share, especially regarding past relationships, the raw, unfiltered nature of his words, hinting at things deeply private, felt like a boundary crossed, too painful for either of us to hear aloud. The letters ceased after that. I heard he lost his job, a situation unrelated to the unfolding global health crisis, something already in motion with his company. Then, even more disturbingly, he ended up in custody. The full details are murky, pieced together from second-hand accounts, so I can't be entirely certain. But the best understanding is that one evening, an argument with his mother escalated dramatically, becoming physical. His father reportedly had to intervene, pulling him away from her until law enforcement arrived and took him into custody. It must have been serious enough for a neighbor to alert the authorities. It's a side of him I never imagined seeing, certainly not directed at anyone, let alone his own mother. There's a bitter irony in it. If only he had fought for us with that same intensity when it mattered most, maybe things would be different now. So, here I am, waiting things out, uncertain of what comes next, but at least not dealing with legal issues on top of everything else. Apologies for any typing errors. I loaned my laptop to my friend's son, and it hasn't felt quite right since, though he's a good kid, and I believe it was just an accident. Wishing everyone reading this safety and well-being during these strange times. Warmly, Mia. Update 8. I actually spoke to him yesterday. The last I'd heard, he was being held after that incident with his mother. I'm not sure if he was released on bail, if charges were dropped, or what the status is, but for the past few days, he'd apparently been sitting in my parents' front yard, simply being there. My father, protective as ever, was ready to confront him forcefully, but my mother, always the calmer presence, went out instead. She spoke to him quietly but firmly, telling him I was gone and encouraging him to move forward with his own life. She called me afterward to tell me this, which is what prompted me to call him last night. He answered, his voice holding a mix of relief that it was me and a profound sadness. The conversation was difficult. "Hello," I began, keeping my tone level. "Hello," he replied softly. "I understand you were at my parents' house," I continued. "I'm not there, so please leave them in peace." I was hoping the rumors weren't true," he stammered. "That you were still here, and we could talk." My voice hardened slightly, the memory of that night sharp. "We tried talking before. You seemed to think that reaching for me, resorting to a physical connection, was a way to somehow fix everything." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick. I don't know how to do this. To end something." "Neither have I admitted. "But I think I've managed it with more dignity. I just need to understand why." His answer was immediate, the familiar refrain. "I have to do what my mother says. She wasn't happy when she found out about you." "You're 32, I pointed out, the absurdity of it stark. "I don't think you're obligated to do everything your mother says anymore." "You just don't understand," he insisted, a note of frustration creeping in. I understand perfectly, I countered. The words weighted with hurt. We talked about my condition years ago. We discussed alternatives. We came up with solutions we were both okay with. But apparently, those weren't acceptable to her, so you simply discarded our entire relationship. Did it truly mean that little to you? You didn't have to leave, he said, the desperation clear. When are you coming back? Not for years, I told him. Not until this global situation is settled and I can find my own life, my own place here. Please, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Please come back. We can get married, adopt. We'll find a way. I'm sorry. I told you, I said, my voice softening slightly, but holding firm. There were always alternatives. You chose to abandon them, along with me. And what about Barbie? She's still calling me defective. She's against adoption anyway. How would any of that change? You're not defective, he insisted. I'm sorry, but I can't control what she thinks. No, I agreed, but you chose to validate it. You've known about my condition since we were 16. 16 years. And suddenly, when she disapproves, it's a deal-breaker. He grasped at a straw. I didn't like her calling you that. In case you didn't hear, I went to jail for defending you. The last thread of patience snapped. The words were quiet, but sharp as glass. Maybe, I said, the silence stretching between us, if you had chosen to defend me when this all started, I might still be there. That seemed to silence him completely. All I heard was a faint, broken whisper of, sorry, repeated over and over before the call disconnected. I lay on the bed afterward, tears flowing silently this time, until Vanessa's oldest child, Victoria, knocked softly and announced dinner was ready. Apologies if this is rambling or poorly formatted. Navigating this platform is still new, and frankly, when someone throws away 2 decades of shared life like it's nothing, it's hard to be perfectly coherent. Just hoping everyone stays safe through this, and that someday soon, I can truly begin building a life for myself here in Germany. I suppose my last words in that conversation finally broke something in him. All I heard was a low, repeating whisper of, sorry, before the line went dead. I just lay there on the bed, the tears falling silently this time, until Victoria, Vanessa's oldest daughter, knocked gently and let me know dinner was ready. Apologies again if this comes across as disjointed or if I sound sharp. Grappling with the reality of someone discarding a relationship that spanned a lifetime tends to bring out a certain bluntness. I just hope everyone is staying safe through everything happening in the world, and that eventually, I can truly move forward and build my life here in Germany. Update 9. This weekend marked another transition. I moved out of my friend Vanessa's place. Her family was incredibly gracious, offering shelter when I needed it most, a kindness I won't forget. But the original plan, conceived before the virus changed everything, involved finding my own apartment and securing a job soon after arriving. With that on hold, staying long-term didn't feel right. My uncle offered to drive down from Küsselbach and pick me up, and accepting his offer felt like the better path than remaining indefinitely. So he came Saturday, stayed with friends, and on Sunday, we drove back to Küsselbach. I'm here now, staying with him and his wife, typing this before sleep claims me. Being back in the town where I was born, where I spent my first 9 years, feels strange. Even on past visits, it never felt quite like this. Maybe it's the quiet streets, the unsettling stillness brought by the global situation, or maybe it's just the weight of my own life feeling so profoundly unsettled. It just doesn't feel like coming home in the way I'd imagined. But that's enough rambling about geography and feelings. I'm just delaying recounting the actual reason for this update, I know. Friday night, my phone rang. His name appeared on the screen. I still have my old number, the same account back in Iowa, so seeing his distinct ringtone flash up caught me completely off guard. I answered with a curt, "What do you want?" It was ruder than I intended, and I apologized as soon as he spoke, saying he just wanted to check in, to say hello. We managed a brief, surprisingly pleasant conversation, a fragile echo of easier times. Until I heard the sharp intrusion of another voice in the background, a screeching query, "Is that her?" followed by his tired-sounding, "I'm talking, leave me alone." And then she was on the line. Barbie, the instigator of all this pain. Her voice was sharp with accusation. "Leave my son alone," she spat. "Haven't you done enough damage?" I didn't engage. I just hung up. She must have snatched his phone. She tried calling back several times, her number flashing on my screen. I ignored them all. When I finally checked the voicemails later, it was a torrent of venom, a litany of accusations painting me as the villain who had ruined his life. She raged about his job loss, a predictable outcome we both knew was coming long before this, when the company owner announced retirement and planned to sell off assets. In fact, he'd even helped colleagues find new positions. She screamed about him losing the house, a direct consequence of our breakup. She brought up him getting into trouble, mentioning him being caught drinking publicly, something I'd heard about from another friend. Apparently he'd bought some drinks and been cited by police for consuming them near the lake. And, of course, she referenced him assaulting her, the incident that led to his arrest, though I admit a dark corner of my mind felt a cold satisfaction that she, of all people, had faced consequences for her actions, even if just from him. She didn't miss the opportunity to deploy her favorite weaponized word, calling me defective again, ranting that if she had only known 16 years ago, she would have steered her son towards a nice, normal girl instead. Then, a manipulative twist that sent a chill down my spine. She claimed Jack had been talking about suicide recently, saying he saw no point in continuing. I tried calling his number back immediately, desperate to speak to him, but each time, she answered, launching back into her screaming tirade. There was no getting through. Defeated, I gave up on calling and wrote him a letter instead. To ensure he actually received it, knowing Barbie would intercept anything sent directly, I mailed it to my parents for them to deliver to the house. In it, I tried to convey that despite everything, a part of me still cared, wishing him well, hoping he could move on. But the central message was unequivocal. It's over. So here I am, 5,000 miles away, the world feeling paused, living under my aunt and uncle's roof, simply waiting for the moment I can begin piecing together a life of my own. Thanks for reading, and apologies again for any awkward formatting. I think I'll close the laptop now and finally try to sleep.